This virgin obese girl was left to die by her newlywed husband. But then an Indian warrior saved her. Rosalind Hart was forced into a marriage she never wanted. Her dying father's last wish was to see her wed. But once her father was gone, her new husband revealed the truth. He had never loved her. Driven by greed for her inheritance, he abandoned her in the desert to die. Half dead beneath the unforgiving sun, Rosalind was found by Chayton, the chief's eldest son and the strongest warrior of his tribe. At first she was nothing but a stranger in his care, unwanted by his people and mocked for her size. But as days passed, her gentle spirit, her patience, and her unwavering support began to awaken something in him. Respect, then admiration, and finally love. Together they would face the scorn of the tribe, the cruelty of her past, and the weight of justice itself. And in the end, Rosalind, once abandoned and mocked, would rise not only as a warrior's wife, but as the true heir to her father's legacy. Before we start, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it helps the algorithm to show you more videos like this from me. Thank you and enjoy. The church smelled of beeswax and dust when Rosalind Hart took her vows. She had always been large, soft-bellied, full-hipped, with a generous, curvy chest that made seamstresses sigh at their measuring tapes. Her cheeks were prettily rounded, her lips a soft pink, and her brunette hair, thick and glossy, was braided into a crown to keep from tugging against the back of her dress. She carried her size with careful grace, shoulders a touch too straight, chin tilted as if braced against wind that never stopped blowing. Upstairs at the Hart Ranch house, Thaddeus Hart, her father, worked at breathing the way a coal stove works at holding heat when embers have turned to ash. His cough had deepened over winter, and in spring he'd begun to sleep in a chair because lying down made his lungs sound like someone crumpling paper in a tight fist. He'd asked for a single promise, and Rosalind, dutiful to a fault, could not refuse it. "Don't leave yourself alone in this world, Rosie," he'd whispered, his hand shaking on hers. "Let me see you safe before I go." Safety, in Thaddeus's mind, wore the face of a husband. Nolan Pratt stood beside Rosalind at the altar. Clean-shaven, well-dressed, with a face that looked better from across a room, he had the kind of pale eyes that never seemed to settle anywhere for long. His family's ranch bordered the Hart spread like two puzzle pieces shaped by water and wind. Everyone understood what it meant that his parents had pushed him toward Rosalind. Two properties under one roof, and the old man's mind set at ease. Love did not need to be mentioned. Rosalind did not ask for it. She wanted peace for her father, who had been good to her in a world that had not. She wanted a door that would shut against gossip and a table where she might sit without being judged like a side of beef. "Do you take this man?" the preacher asked. "I do," she answered, voice steady and quiet. "And you?" he asked Nolan. Nolan's mouth cut the shape of a smile without finding the feeling behind it. "I do." They kissed like strangers saying hello in passing. The congregation clapped with polite relief. Thaddeus, brought down in a chair to see the ceremony, bowed his head and cried in a way men pretend they don't. That night, Rosalind sat on the edge of a bed that smelled of lavender, starch, and sunlight. Nolan did not join her. He had gone out with his friends to toast the happy future, and returned late with the kind of laughter that made the house feel colder. Rosalind undid her braid herself. She folded her wedding dress herself. She slid beneath the sheets alone, her unkissed mouth pressed to a pillow that did not know her. Morning took Thaddeus Hart. He left with the same stubbornness he had lived, plain and without complaint. The doctor said the years had simply ended. The house held quiet the way a church does after the hymn is over, and everyone who meant their words most is still standing. The will was read. Rosalind inherited the land and stock. The marriage meant Nolan would manage them. Neighbors brought pies. They drank coffee and made small talk, because grief is something people think you can sweep with conversation. On the third day after the funeral, Nolan stood in the doorway with his hat already on his head. "We ought to check the far pasture," he said. "Fences take it hard in spring." Rosalind nodded. She was not naive, only kind. She still believed things could be improved by effort. She put on a dark dress made for mourning, black that pulled a little at the seams. She tied her hair back in a practical knot. The wind smelled of dust and green beginnings. They rode in silence, the ranch falling behind them in a slow ribbon. When the last line of cottonwoods dwindled into thin sticks against the sun, Nolan stopped. They were in a basin of pale sand and scrub. The ground looked like a cracked bowl someone had tried to piece back together. Rosalind shaded her eyes. "Do you see a break?" "No," he said and dismounted. He took her reins and looped them around a thorn tree. "Rosalind," he began, and her name sounded like a chore in his mouth. This isn't going to work." "What isn't?" She dismounted, legs unsteady from the long ride. She was flushed from heat and the way the saddle bites at a body that carries more than most. "You and me." He didn't quite meet her eyes. "I did what my parents wanted. Your father got what he wanted. It's done." She frowned, the world shifting under her boots. "We are married." "It's just a word," he said, as if words didn't build or unmake entire lives. He set a canteen on the ground. Another. "You'll be all right here a while." "Nolan," she said. The name caught on a burr of disbelief. "We are in the open. There's no water for miles. The sun." "You'll find your way back," he said, already turning. "Or someone will find you. I can't do this. I won't chain my life to—" He let the sentence dangle where it hung most cruelly, eyes flicking to the parts of her that had been mocked since girlhood. The insult landed and then kept falling. Down through every year she had learned to be gentle in a world that was not. Rosalind swallowed. "You can't leave me." He mounted. He set his heels. The horse shifted, impatient. "I can," he said simply. "Goodbye." She stepped forward and caught air. The horse leapt into a run with the easy speed of a thing born to it. Sand came up in a pale cloud. Nolan became a line, then a speck, then nothing but the feeling that something had just been erased from a slate, and no one would admit there had been writing there at all. Rosalind stood a long while. The sun pushed on her shoulders until they ached. She opened one of the canteens. It was barely a mouthful. The other was the same. She laughed once, an awful breaking sound, then stopped because it hurt to waste breath. She tried to walk. A mile in the desert is longer than a mile anywhere else. Her dress took in the heat and gave it back. Sweat ran down the valley of her spine and pooled at the band of her stays. Her throat pinched itself into paper. The land reflected light with the cruelty of a mirror that hates its owner. After an hour she sat. After two, she lay down because the ground felt closer to mercy than the sky did. The day turned its face. Shadows crawled out from beneath the stones and brush like shy animals. Cold came with the dark like a debt collector. Rosalind's teeth knocked together. She wrapped her arms around herself and felt the arms were not enough. She thought of her father's last look, tired, hopeful. She thought of the small ways people had asked her to apologize for her body without using the word apologize. She thought of being at the church altar and saying "I do" because someone she loved had asked for peace. "You said I wouldn't be alone," she whispered into the sand. "But I am." Stars appeared and multiplied. The desert made its night noises, whisper of wings, long breath of wind dragging grit across grit. Rosalind's eyes fluttered. Some instinct, older than language, kept her chest working, while her mind drifted toward a door it did not plan to return through. The first thing she felt before she saw it was a weight on the air, like the presence of a storm that had disciplined itself into a single man. Hoofbeats, slow and certain, not the erratic, showy clatter of a boy who wanted to be seen. This was a measured sound, a drum that had learned restraint. The horse stopped close enough that she felt heat come off it in waves. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion that spoke of long practice and a body built for moving with purpose. Boots crushed sand. A shadow fell over her face, blocking the stars. She blinked, fighting the glue of exhaustion in her lashes. A man crouched beside her, Comanche from his braids and the way his clothes were built for the land instead of for show. He was broad and powerful through the chest and shoulders, the cords of his arms clear even in dim light. When he moved, muscles shifted under tanned skin as clean as a bow drawn to a precise point. His jaw was square, his mouth firm, his eyes the calm, cutting dark of a hawk that had already decided what it would take and what it would spare. He bore himself with the authority of the chief's eldest son, not loud, not boastful, simply a man who had never had to ask permission to be strong. He touched two fingers to the pulse at her throat. The gesture was efficient and gentle, like a smith testing steel. "You're alive," he said, voice low and resonant, shaped by a chest built like a wall. "But close." His hand slid behind her head with a care that surprised her even inside her daze. He lifted, not straining, he was that strong, and brought a water skin to her mouth. "Drink." Cool water struck her tongue and ran over cracked lips. The first swallow hurt and then soothed, like truth after a long lie. She coughed, and he was patient through it, supporting her weight as if it meant nothing to him, as if holding her were a simple fact and not a burden. He spoke again, tone steady. "Who left you here?" "My husband," she managed, and the word lodged in the space behind her teeth like a stone she had to push around to speak. He said I'd find my way." A brief heat moved through the man's eyes, not surprise, not even anger. The look of someone cataloging a wrong with the intent to set it straight later. "You won't die here," he said, and there was no braggadocio in it, only a decision. He lifted her. Rosalind had been picked up before by people who made her feel like a problem, like a calf that needed wrestling. This was different. He gathered her with an ease that told the truth about his body. Thick arms like hewn timber, chest wide and hard, forearms ridged with strength, and with a respect that told the truth about his mind. She felt small for the first time, not because she'd been diminished, but because she was resting inside someone else's certainty. He carried her to his horse and set her across the saddle. When he mounted behind her, the heat of his torso pressed along her back, solid and protective. One of his arms came around to secure her. The weight of it was a promise and a shield. "What is your name?" she asked, voice a thread. He paused the way men do when names carry many rooms inside them. "Chayton," he said at last, and the syllables moved like a falcon's shadow across open ground. "Rosalind," she whispered. "Rosalind," he repeated, as if he were setting the word into a place it could be kept. He clicked his tongue, and the horse moved into a sure-footed trot, then a ground-eating lope, northwest, where the land remembered water. Wind lifted the ends of her hair. The stars turned above them like a slow wheel. Chayton's arm remained firm around her, the living band of a man used to guarding what he had decided was his to protect. He rode like a promise. Rosalind let her eyes close, not in surrender to the desert, but in trust that someone strong was there between her and the things that wanted to finish what had been started. She had been left to die as a problem to be solved by the sun. She was being carried away as a woman worth saving by a man who knew how to carry weight. Sand, silence, and her, without breaking. Chayton's horse carried them through the dark until dawn began to peel the sky into pale ribbons of gray and rose. Rosalind drifted in and out of awareness, cradled against the warrior's chest, hearing only the thud of hooves and the steady beat of his heart close to her ear. It was an anchor, a rhythm that told her she was no longer alone in the indifferent stretch of desert. When the horizon lifted and broke into mesas and cottonwoods, the smell of smoke reached them. Wood, roasting meat, the faint tang of tanned hides. A village stirred in the distance, teepees rising in a neat circle, horses tethered along a line, children darting like sparrows in the morning light. The Comanche camp. Rosalind stirred, shame tightening her chest. What would they think of her? A pale-skinned woman, heavy, dressed in black mourning cloth, draped across the saddle of their strongest warrior. As they rode into camp, eyes turned. Chayton slowed the horse, posture upright, chin forward. His broad shoulders caught the light of sunrise, bronze skin gleaming with the quiet authority of a man who belonged. Rosalind wanted to sink into the ground. Women whispered from behind their cooking fires. Some narrowed their eyes, others covered their mouths to hide laughter. Young girls stared boldly, their gazes darting between Rosalind's body and the man who carried her. One girl, slim, sharp-eyed, her braids bound with bright beads, spoke in a tongue Rosalind couldn't understand, but her tone was plain enough, mocking, biting. The other women giggled. Chayton ignored them. His arm tightened around Rosalind. At the edge of camp stood a man older, broad like a tree still rooted deep, his hair streaked with gray, eyes dark with years of command. The chief. Chayton dismounted, still carrying Rosalind in his arms, as though she weighed no more than a child. The chief's gaze swept over her. White skin burned red from sun, cracked lips, heavy frame, dress dirtied and torn from sand, his mouth pressed into a line. "You bring her here?" he asked in his language, low but caring. "She was left to die," Chayton answered in the same tongue, voice like flint. "She is not of us. She is alive because I chose her to be." The chief's eyes held his son's for a long, weighty moment. Then he gestured toward one of the empty shelters on the camp's edge. "She stays there, not among the women." Chayton gave a single nod. He carried Rosalind to the lodge of stretched hide and set her down gently on a bedding of furs. Her legs trembled, but his hands steadied her until she was settled. He poured water into a wooden bowl and held it to her lips. "Drink." Rosalind obeyed. The coolness stung her throat but revived her. She whispered, "Thank you." Chayton studied her face a moment. He had saved her body from the desert, but something else lingered in her eyes. An old kind of abandonment, carved deeper than one day of cruelty. "You rest now," he said. His voice had a command in it, but beneath it, a strange gentleness. By the second day, her fever broke. Chayton's sisters brought herbs. Children peeked inside the lodge, daring one another to run closer, then shrieking with laughter when she looked at them. The tribe watched her as though she were a curiosity, a heavy woman with pale skin, dropped into their midst by fate. But Rosalind, even weak, did not meet scorn with scorn. She thanked the women who brought food. She smiled faintly at the children, offering them her handkerchief to play with. She did not defend herself with sharp words, only with a patience that confused those who mocked her. When Chayton entered the lodge one evening with a bowl of stew, he found her sitting upright, carefully mending a tear in her dress, with thread she had begged from one of the women. Her hands, though still shaky, moved with delicate precision. "You sew," he observed. She glanced up, embarrassed. I thought if I kept my hands busy, I might not feel the stares so much." Chayton's jaw tightened. He had heard the whispers outside. He had seen the way two young women, both lithe and graceful, both daughters of warriors, looked at Rosalind with contempt, whispering that she had stolen what they had dreamed of. He sat cross-legged near the fire pit. The stew's steam rose between them. "You are not here for them," he said. "You are here because I chose to bring you." Her eyes glistened, though she tried to smile. "No man has ever spoken of me like that before." Chayton tilted his head. He was not a man of easy words. He had been raised to show strength, to protect, to fight. Yet when he looked at Rosalind, sitting in the half-light, plump hands holding needle and cloth, cheeks flushed with shyness, he felt something unfamiliar, an urge to reassure rather than command. He handed her the bowl. She accepted it with both hands, careful, grateful. When she ate, she closed her eyes as if savoring was a prayer. For the first time, Chayton's gaze lingered, not on her size nor her foreignness, but on the way she carried herself, gentle, humble, and yet brimming with quiet endurance. That night, voices rose outside the lodge. "She will shame him," one young woman hissed. "The chief's son with a white woman fat as a cow." Another voice chimed in, sharp with envy. "He should marry one of us. Why waste himself?" Rosalind froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Her cheeks burned. She lowered her gaze to the stew, shoulders hunched, trying to make herself small. Chayton rose. He pushed back the flap and stepped outside. The camp quieted at once. His tall frame, lit by firelight, cast a long shadow. His arms folded across his broad chest, muscles taut, his jaw set like stone. "She is under my protection," he said, voice like thunder rolling low. "Mock her, and you mock me." The women lowered their eyes. No one spoke again. When he returned, Rosalind looked at him with something between awe and fear. "You defended me." He sat down again, his expression unreadable. "I do not let jackals snap at those I shelter." Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back. She wanted to say more, but words trembled and caught. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you," with a softness that reached deeper than gratitude. It carried need, trust, in something tender she had long hidden. Chayton stared at her a moment longer, then gave a curt nod. He did not say what flickered in his chest, but he felt it. This woman, cast off by another, had begun to matter. That night, while the camp slept, Rosalind lay awake, staring at the smoke hole in the roof of the lodge. The stars winked faintly above, distant and eternal. Her body still ached, but her heart felt something strange, like a fire that burned not to consume, but to warm. In the silence, she remembered how Nolan's hand had dropped hers, leaving her to die. Then she remembered the strength of Chayton's arm around her on the horse, the certainty in his voice when he said she would not die. One man had seen her as weight to be cast aside. The other had carried her as though she were worth every ounce. Her lips curved, almost against her will. For the first time in years, Rosalind felt the fragile sprout of hope. Morning in camp broke like a quiet promise. Smoke drifting straight up from cook fires, horses snorting steam, dew jeweled on the threads of spiderwebs stretched between willow switches. Rosalind woke to the sound of women laughing somewhere, out by the river, and the soft thud of a pestle working seeds in a wooden bowl. Her body ached in deep, complaining ways, but her mind felt clearer, as if the desert grit had been rinsed out of it. Chayton stepped in with the sun behind him, shoulders filling the lodge's doorway. He had a bow across his back and a brace of quail in his hand. The muscles across his chest shifted under a deerskin shirt darkened by early sweat, and the set of his jaw was that of a man who rose before problems could grow teeth. "You slept," he said. "I did." Rosalind pushed herself up on a rolled blanket. "Thank you for the water last night, and the cool stone you set at my neck. It helped." He grunted in acknowledgement, but his eyes flicked over her, checking color in her cheeks, the steadiness of her hands, the surety of her breathing. Satisfied, he hung the quail, then crouched to blow on coals until a tongue of flame waked and spread. He moved with efficient certainty, as though the morning and the tasks inside it had been waiting on his say-so. "Let me," Rosalind said, reaching for the small iron pan set aside. "I can pluck birds. My father used to. We had hunters over sometimes." Chayton handed her one without commentary. He watched as she worked. Her fingers were quick and careful, and when she faltered from weakness, she smiled wryly and adapted, setting the bird against her thigh to brace it, using her body as a steadying weight. The smell of raw meat rose, sharp and clean, and the tiny feathers clung to her dress. She didn't complain, only blew them away from the pan and kept going. Outside, children skittered closer, curious. Rosalind glanced up and, half shy, half brave, waggled a few quills in her fist like a ridiculous fan. Giggles scattered. One boy edged in, hand out. She opened her palm and let him take the smallest feather. He ran off with it like a treasure. Chayton saw this and said nothing, but a line between his brows softened. They ate by the door, the day lengthening. When she burned her fingertips testing a piece of meat, he took the pan from her hand with that calm authority of his and held it while she chewed, then passed a folded scrap of hide for her to use like a mitten. It was a small thing, done without fuss, but it lived in the same room as protection. After they finished, he rose. "I go out," he said. "Horses need water." "May I?" The word leapt out before she could dress it in politeness. "May I help? If you show me what not to do?" He considered. The image of her crumpled in the desert was still too near, but she had walked without complaint this morning from pallet to doorway and back again, and when she met his gaze there was no plea in it, only willingness. "Yes," he said at last. Slow. They went together to the river, his stride checked to her shorter, heavier pace. At first, camp eyes followed them like flies, drawn to the sight of the chief's son with the white woman who did not fit the lines of their women. The young ones with bright beads in their hair looked longest and least kindly, but Chayton's face gave nothing back to such looks. The distance between his shoulders warned trouble to choose another door. At the water, Rosalind knelt and simply breathed, damp air on her skin, the cool mirror of the river. She had not realized how much of herself had been clenched against thirst and heat and shame. Her reflection shivered on the ripples. A round face reddened by sun, hair unbraided and wind-snarled, a body that had kept her alive despite being scorned for years. She dipped her sleeves to wet them and pressed them against her neck, sighing. Chayton stood knee-deep, pulling the line of horses forward one by one. The cords in his forearms rose as he held their halters. He rubbed a gelding's jaw, murmuring, patient with skittishness and stubbornness, the way he was patient with weather. Not indulgent, not harsh, simply immovable. When one horse shied wide and tangled his rope, Rosalind was beside it before she could think. Hand out, voice low. "Easy, sweetheart," she whispered, not to the animal alone, but to the tremor in her own chest. "No one's going to hurt you." The horse blew, ears pricking. Chayton glanced over. The angle of his mouth shifted around something nearly like a smile. "You have quiet," he said. "Only on the outside," Rosalind answered, a little breathless now that the moment had passed. "The inside is a kettle most days." He made a sound of understanding. "Inside can boil," he agreed. "Outside must not." His hands ran strong and sure along the horse's throat, and the animal settled fully. They worked until midday, then returned slow. The walk back felt different, not because the stairs had cooled, but because Rosalind had done something useful with a man who did not treat her like a thing to be tolerated. A simple rightness hummed in her bones. Effort, company, the absence of humiliation. When they reached the lodge, Chayton paused. "If anyone speaks poison to you," he said in a tone that made the fine hairs along her arms rise, "send for me." "I will," she said, "but I think I could answer kind, and it would unsettle them more." This pried a real smile out of him. It made him look younger, the scar at the corner of his mouth less severe. "Kindness is a spear they cannot catch," he said. She stored that line where she kept the good ones, close and lit. By the end of the week, the camp had adjusted the way a body adjusts to a new scar. Rosalind learned names, then the words that held the good mornings and the thank yous. She learned to grind seeds into mash and how to fold a hide so it did not hold creases. She sat with the grandmothers and asked about herbs for cough, for ache, for heart that would not sleep. When a little girl fell and scraped both knees, Rosalind, sorry for the pain in the cry because it sounded like a sound she knew, tore a strip from her own underskirt, wetted it, and bound the hurt while humming the tune her father had used to sing when the chickens needed calming in a storm. The girl's mother watched, guarded at first, then grateful. That evening, a small basket of berries appeared at the lodge door. No words, no debt, just the slow, shy beginning of something that might grow into acceptance. Not everyone softened. The two young women who had spoken the cruelest words, the chief's niece among them, kept their eyes sharp and their tongues sharper when Chayton could not hear. They called Rosalind Cloudflesh and Riverlog, things that were big and in the way. Once, as Rosalind stooped to lift a water skin, one of them hissed, "He will never want you for warm night. Your body is a wall between you." Rosalind's hands trembled. She could have told the truth, that no man had touched her in the way the law expects on wedding night, that the one who should have had only disgust and a plan for land. Instead, she straightened and faced the girl fully and said, in halting words she hoped conveyed what her English would not, "The size of a heart is not measured like the size of a waist." The girl blinked, then turned away with a toss of disdain. Rosalind exhaled slowly, fingers loosening. When Chayton came that night, she did not tell him, not because she feared his anger, though she had seen how his anger moved when roused, but because she wanted to fight some battles with the way she chose to stand. He sensed something anyway, set down bone broth and meat and watched her face as she sipped. "What happened?" he asked, as if weather had changed and he had felt it. She thought. "I learned today that war can be made with whispers," she said and tried to smile. "But I have better armor than I thought." He leaned his forearms on his knees. The muscles in them shifted like ropes under canvas. "Tell me." She did. Not the words, but the solution. How she had answered steady. How the mother with the berries had come. How a boy had traded her a polished stone for a story. And she had told him about a colt she once coaxed out of a tangled fence, using only patience and an apple. "You make things calm," Chayton said quiet. "You make me calm." The statement startled her, like a door opening onto color where she expected a wall. She lifted her eyes. He met them and did not look away. Whatever he had meant by calm was not small. It lived with respect, with relief, with the peace a man feels when he comes in out of relentless wind and shuts it on the porch. "Then I'm glad," she said, and something mobile inside her chest moved toward him of its own will. A storm sailed over the plains 3 days later, low and sudden. The sky went the color of a bruise. The wind's hand tore down a line of drying hides and sent them pinwheeling. Children screamed delight and fear. Women ran for pots and tinder, shoring against rain. Chayton came at a run from the horse line, hair unbound and snapping like a flag. He was all motion, gathering, tying, lifting. When a typee's pole slid and threatened to drop, he leapt, caught the ridge line in both hands and heaved. Muscle bunched across his back like sculpted stone. The tent righted. The wind knifed and tried again. He grinned at it with his teeth and pulled harder. Rosalind waded into the chaos with her weight used like ballast. Where lighter bodies were tossed by gusts, she set her feet and braced, shoulder to pole, hip to rope. She pressed her palms flat against flapping hide and leaned until it stilled. Rain slid cold down the back of her neck and between her breasts. She coughed and laughed at the same time, astonished by the joy of effort. She could help, here, now, without apology. After, soaked and panting, she found Chayton at the edge of the horse line, hair plastered to his temples, breath sawing in and out. He wore the storm like a fight he'd won. When he saw her, his expression cut open into something clear and fierce. "You stood," he said. "So did you," she answered, pushing wet hair out of her eyes. He took a step toward her that made the space between them heat and shrink, and then a voice came behind them like a struck blade. "She stood," said the chief's niece, words clipped, "and she will fall. You shame us, Chayton. You bring a white widow with belly like a full sack into our circle and make us carry her shape." Chayton's head turned like a wolf's. "Enough," he said. The word had an edge. "She has given more to this camp in 10 days than you have given with all your small teeth." The girl flushed, lifted her chin. "You choose her. You turn away from us." "I choose what is true," he said, and stepped again toward Rosalind, as if his body had decided to make a line and place her behind it. She touched his forearm, lightly, respectfully. "It's all right," she murmured. "Let the storm blow itself out. The camp is safe." He looked down at her hand on his skin, at the contrast of pale and sun bronze, at the softness of her fingers against the cords and scars of his wrist. When he lifted his gaze, it had changed. Not to lust, not to something hungry and loud, but to a certainty settling into its shape. "You make me remember what I am," he said, voice low enough that only she could write it. "Not son, not hunter, not shadow of a chief, a man." Her mouth parted. Heat climbed in her chest, not the heat of embarrassment or fear, but the new foreign warmth of being seen without being judged. She wanted to answer with something out of scripture or poetry, but all she had was honesty. "You make me feel safe," she said, "and beautiful, when I do not owe it to any mirror." He breathed once, deep. The storm wind tugged at them. Camp noises returned in slow measure. Chayton took her hand, deliberately in a way that could be witnessed, and turned it palm up. He set into it a small polished bone carving of a falcon. "For you," he said. "Why?" "Because you look at me like one who has flown far and is not afraid to land." She closed her fingers over the token. Somewhere behind her ribs, a hinge she hadn't known was rusted shut, eased and swung. Word of the storm work and the hand-holding traveled as fast as gossip always travels, on light feet with loaded breath. By evening, old women had made their assessments, hunters had traded looks, and the young ones had drawn lines inside their imaginations and sharpened sticks along them. The chief called council when the sun slid red along the horizon. Men sat in a circle, women in another. Children wore silence like a blanket and tried not to twitch. Rosalind kept to the edge, as was right, but Chayton's shadow fell long enough to cover her. The chief spoke first. "A woman is in our camp who is not of us," he said. "She was brought by my son. She has not harmed us. She has worked. But the air is thick with words, and I do not like to breathe smoke when there is no fire." A murmur. Then a warrior with a scar down his cheek said, "She has done no wrong, but she draws anger. The boy's path must be clear if he is to be chief." Another, "She is a mouth for water when water is less." Chayton's jaw set. He had been silent out of respect. Now he rose. The great width of him, the way strength lived in his arms and chest and legs, the easy balance of him on the balls of his feet, all of it said, "This is not a man you move by talk alone." "I brought her," he said. The words carried out to the last ring of listeners. I will answer. He told the story short. Found in the desert, husbands leaving, thirst, heat. He did not dress it with pity. He set it down like a fact beside a road. This happened, and then I did this, and now we are here. She worked, he finished. She listens. She holds children. She steadies poles in storm. She does not make trouble. Others make it around her and call it hers. The chief's niece rose from the women's circle with her chin cut high. You are blinded by a soft voice, she said, by a pale face that looks different and makes people want to hold it. You do not see that her body cannot give you sons who run like deer. You do not see that she will slow you and make you stay and tie a rope to your ankle. The silence that fell was hot. Rosalind's heart thudded. She did not want Chayton to fight this girl with anger. Anger would bruise him in ways she would feel later when he lay on his back and looked at the roof for long minutes without moving. She pushed herself up, legs shaking, and spoke before Chayton could open his mouth. I am not fast, she said, and the honesty she put on the floor surprised even her. I am not light. I am not the choice you would make for dancing or racing or fetching something dropped in a narrow place. I am strong in other ways. I am patient. I do not break when someone shouts. I can carry baskets the thin arm do not want to carry, and I can sit with a woman in pain and not need to run from the sound of it. I can keep a secret. I can hold a boundary. The niece laughed in her throat, a sound like a little knife. Pretty words. Rosalind smiled, and the smile was kind. No, plain ones. She lowered herself to the ground again, breath a little ragged. Chayton's gaze found her across the space, proud, grateful, more than those, and then returned to the circle of men. I do not ask you to love her, he said. I ask you to leave off gnawing. If you will not do that, then you test me, and I do not fail tests. The chief watched his son. In the old man's eyes moved memory, a boy who had outstood other boys, a teenager who had tracked an injured elk for 2 days and brought it down clean, a young man whose judgments were flint-struck and true more often than not. He exhaled. She may stay, he said, because the one who brought her asked no covering for weakness, only a fair place to stand. A long breath let out of the circle like air out of a bellows. It was not love. It was ceasefire. Acceptance is a slow germination. It came in pieces. A grandmother brought a packet of dried mint and laid it on Rosalind's palm without looking at her. A boy showed her how to twist willow bark into cord, and when she did it without dropping strands, he nodded, solemn as any teacher. One of the women who had laughed earlier sat beside her in the afternoon and asked in careful English, how to make bread like yours. Rosalind taught her, laughing at the way flour found faces in hair, at the way dough stuck, at the way kneading made even quiet women talk like creeks. The smell of baking drew people like bee scent draws bees. They ate together in the open, butter melting down warm crust. Someone put a slice in Chayton's hand when he passed, and he took it and caught Rosalind's eye over the steam. That look deserved a room of its own. Of course, there were still cuts. The niece found them. Once Rosalind turned in time to see the girl toss her laundry from the line into mud. She picked the dress up silently and washed it again. Once the girl slipped a thorn under Rosalind's sleeping roll. Rosalind found it, plucked it, and, on a mischievous impulse she had not recognized in herself in years, used it to pin a flower against the lodge leather. The grandmother saw, and for an entire afternoon, their eyes twinkled. Chayton learned these things late, or not at all, because he was leading hunts and scouting weather and bringing boys into their first bows. But when he came at day's end to sit with Rosalind, the weight he laid on his haunches was the weight a man lays when the place he sits at is home. He told her about the council, the edges of it, the parts that could be spoken. She listened like a bank listens to a river, curving to it, giving it a path. When he doubted his choice to move the horse lines, she reminded him of the storm and the way the river had swollen and pressed. When he spoke of a young hunter who was too eager, she asked what tests might teach patience instead of merely scar. When he fell silent and stared at his hands, she reached out, careful, always asking without words, and laid her palm over his knuckles. The skin there was rough, nicked, alive. He relaxed by degrees, and the tension that rides any man tasked with responsibility unwound enough to let him breathe all the way down. "Your father," she said one night, "carries himself like a man who has not forgiven himself for outliving something." Chayton startled at the precision of it. "My mother," he said, and then he said nothing, but the pain moved from behind his eyes to the place between them, where shared sorrow lives. "I am sorry," she said, "not the thin kind, the kind you can reach into and find a hand there." He nodded, swallowed. "You ask nothing," he said, surprised by it. "Not proof, not story, not apology." "I have asked for enough in my life," she said. "Now I offer." He looked at her as at a clean horizon after thick trees. The line between them crossed itself quietly and then decided not to uncross. It happened on a day of small chores and no argument, which is how big things often choose to arrive. They were mending a tear in a child's blanket. Rosalind held the fabric taut while Chayton threaded and tied. His fingers were big for fine work. Hers were made for it. Every time his knuckles brushed her wrist, a little bell rang in her blood. "Your hands are strong," she murmured without thinking. "So are yours," he said, and looked up. They both paused, and the pause held. He did not reach for her. He did not need to. She was already leaning in a degree so small, only the little bell noticed. He breathed. She breathed. The space between their foreheads narrowed, then closed. He touched his brow to hers and let it rest there. No one had ever blessed her like that. No one had ever taken from her like that either. Something given freely, something held in return. When they parted, her mouth felt warm, and the world, though unchanged, had edges that did not scrape. He rose, went to the doorway, and stood with arms folded, watching camp the way a good wall watches a city. She finished the seam. Life continued to make the little noises it makes when it is not trying to impress anyone. They both smiled without needing to say it what. That night he spoke to his father under a sky combed smooth by wind. They spoke a long while. It was not a request. It was not a rebellion either. It was a son and a leader deciding what kind of men they would be when the other was gone. The next morning, Chayton walked into the middle of camp, put his palm up in the air the way you do when you mean to make a clean line through noise, and said in a voice that carried to the horses and back, "I will take Rosalind as my wife." The words landed like a thrown spear, finding earth point first and standing there, humming. The chief closed his eyes once, then opened them. He did not smile. He did not frown. He nodded, small, grave, as if blessing and caution had had a child, and this was its face. The grandmothers murmured. The boys gaped. The women glanced at one another. The niece made a sound in her throat and stalked away. Chayton turned then, not to his father or to the circle of men, but to Rosalind. He held out his hand, not as if to pull her away from something, as if to invite her into it. She stepped forward, heart high against the walls of her chest. Her fingers slid into his. They fit like work fits a worker, like peace fits rest, like vows ought to fit. "Are you certain?" she asked, because the part of her that had learned caution had one final duty. "I am a man," he said, the edges of the words ironed flat by decision. "And I choose." She swallowed. Joy and fear rose together. Joy lifted, fear fell away. "Then I choose too," she said, and smiled through the tears that would not be denied. "I choose you." The camp, which had braced for scene, found itself in the presence of something else. Quiet certainty. It embarrassed those who wanted spectacle. It humbled those who had thrown stones with their tongues. It also did not end anything. It began what comes next. The day of their union dawned with smoke curling skyward. The smell of sage and cedar sharp in the air. The Comanche women laid out blankets dyed in red and yellow, the patterns telling of storms endured and victories remembered. A circle formed, wide enough to hold every eye, every whisper, every judgment. Rosalind stood just beyond it, heart pounding like a drum she could not quiet. She wore no white gown this time, only a simple dress one of the older women had helped her stitch from deer hide softened by hands. It fit her body in a way her old dresses never had. Not strained, not ashamed, simply wrapped around her as if acknowledging, "This is you, and you are enough." Her hair had been brushed until it shone, then braided with thin cords of blue wool. At her chest hung the falcon carving Chayton had given her. She touched it now, fingers trembling. The chief stood tall, his expression stern but not unkind. He spoke words over the fire, words Rosalind could not follow but felt in the cadence of his voice. Tradition, blessing, warning. Then Chayton stepped forward. His hair was loose today, dark and thick, falling past his shoulders. A band of beaded leather circled his brow. Across his chest, scars mapped battles fought and survived, his muscles taut beneath sun-browned skin. He looked every inch the son of a chief, every inch the man who had chosen her against scorn and whispers. He walked directly to Rosalind and held out his hand. Not timid, not hesitant. Sure. Her heart leapt into her throat. For a moment she faltered, afraid of the eyes, of the laughter she thought she heard at the edges of the circle. Then she remembered his words. You make me remember I am a man. She set her hand into his. His palm swallowed hers, warm, calloused, strong. He drew her into the circle. The tribe watched, some with resignation, some with curiosity, a few still with thinly veiled contempt. The young women who had hoped for him glared openly, arms crossed, mouths tight, but no one spoke, because Chayton's choice was final. The chief raised his arms, chanting. Smoke rose in a spiral. A hawk wheeled overhead, its shadow sweeping across them. Murmurs rippled. Omen, sign, blessing. Chayton looked at Rosalind, and his dark eyes held something that silenced even her fear. Certainty. When the chief finished, Chayton took a strip of leather cord and bound their wrists together. No rope breaks what is already tied in the heart, he said in his tongue, then repeated slowly for her in English. Rosalind's lips trembled. She whispered, I am yours. And I am he answered, and his voice rang with iron. The circle broke into applause, some genuine, some reluctant. Children ran, whooping, scattering flower petals. The grandmothers nodded, pleased at omens. Even the skeptical women lowered their eyes, for a man like Chayton did not speak lightly. Rosalind stood at his side, bound hand in his, her chest swelling with something she had never dared to hope for, belonging. That night the camp grew quiet. The fires burned low. Music from rattles and flutes lingered in the air, but the people began to settle into their lodges. Chayton led Rosalind into his. The space smelled of leather, smoke, and the faint musk of his skin. Weapons lined one side, carefully kept. Pelts softened the ground. The fire pit glowed faintly, embers red as a heartbeat. Rosalind's hands shook as she unbraided her hair, fingers clumsy. Her chest tightened with old fears. The memory of Nolan, his cold kiss, his quick departure, clawed at her. She had been unwanted, left untouched, discarded before she had even learned what it meant to be desired. Chayton watched her. He said nothing at first. Then he crossed to her and gently took her hands, stilling their trembling. You are afraid, he said, voice deep but soft. She nodded, eyes downcast. I was never wanted. Not truly. His fingers tilted her chin upward until she met his gaze. His eyes were dark, steady, fierce in a way that protected rather than threatened. Then let me be the first to want you, and the last. Tears pricked her eyes. He lowered his head and kissed her. Not the dry, dismissive peck she had known before, but a slow, deliberate press of lips that lingered until her breath caught. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek as though memorizing her. Her body, tense as a bowstring, began to ease. They undressed slowly, carefully, as if time itself had given permission. Chayton's hands were strong, but they moved with reverence, not hunger. Every scar on his skin spoke of battles survived, every line of his muscle of strength harnessed. Not for domination, but for protection. When he finally held her, it was not with pity, nor with impatience, but with pride. He buried his face in her neck and whispered in his tongue, words she did not know but felt like vows written into her skin. And when they lay together, Rosalind wept quietly, not from pain, nor fear, but from the breaking of a dam she had carried her whole life. She had been seen, chosen, cherished. For the first time, she understood what it meant for a man to make her feel both safe and beautiful. Days passed. The tribe adjusted. At first, the young women sneered, whispering when Rosalind passed, eyes sharp with envy. But gradually their voices lost sting. Because the camp saw her carry water without complaint, tend fires, and care for children with patience that did not run out. They saw Chayton return from hunts and seek her first, resting his broad frame beside her as if her presence was as necessary as food. When a grandmother fell ill with fever, Rosalind sat by her side through the night, wiping her brow, humming soft hymns she had learned in her father's house. By morning, the fever broke. That grandmother declared loudly, "The big woman carries a gentle heart," and from that day, no one dared mock her in her presence. Children adored her. They ran to her lodge for stories. She told them of rivers back east, of apple orchards in snow, of fat geese honking over fields. They laughed and tugged her hands, begging for more. Even the chief, once skeptical, began to nod when he passed her. Rosalind had gone from abandoned widow to unwanted stranger to wife of the strongest warrior, and now slowly to part of the tribe's circle. But her story did not end there. For in the quiet of the night, holding Chayton's arm across her chest, Rosalind remembered her father's last words. "Do not let anyone take from you what is rightfully yours." And she remembered something else. The law. A marriage abandoned, an attempt at murder, a contract broken. By rights, the land and inheritance Nolan had stolen were still hers. Her hand tightened around the falcon carving at her chest. "Chayton," she whispered into the darkness. He stirred, his deep voice muffled by sleep. "I must return, not alone, but with help. My father's words, they give me claim." He opened his eyes, even half asleep. The strength in them steadied her. "Then we will return," he said, "and we will take what is yours." The season turned. Grass sprang green again across the plains, and the tribe's horses grew slick and restless with new strength. Rosalind had learned to walk the camp paths without shrinking. She laughed when children tugged her hands. She spoke enough of their tongue to greet, to thank, to soothe. At Chayton's side, she was no longer a stranger but a wife, a woman who had weathered whispers and stood anyway. Yet the memory of her father tugged at her like reins in the dark. "Do not let anyone take from you what is rightfully yours." She knew now that Nolan had not just abandoned her, he had tried to erase her. But his cruelty had broken the very law he thought would shield him. Marriage was contract. Attempted murder by desertion was breach. By rights, she still owned her father's land, and more besides. One night, lying against Chayton's chest, she whispered the truth of it. His arm was heavy over her waist, his breathing deep. He listened without interruption, without doubt, until she finished. "Then it must be done," he said simply, as if speaking of a hunt or a horse to be broken. "But I cannot do it alone," she said softly. "I'll need help." Chayton's hand brushed her hair back from her face. "You have me," he said, "and whoever else you choose." Rosalind chose Nathaniel Ward, once a boy who had run with her across meadows, climbing fences and stealing apples. Nathaniel had gone on to study law in the nearest town. She remembered him as tall and bookish, with ink-stained fingers and a face always half hidden behind a volume. He had promised her once when they were young, "If anyone ever wrongs you, Rosie, I'll fight them with words sharper than any blade." She prayed he had not forgotten. Chayton rode with her into town. The streets felt narrower than she remembered, lined with brick and wood, with the stink of horse dung and coal smoke thick in the air. People stared at the sight of the Comanche warrior, broad-shouldered, bronzed, moving with the controlled grace of a predator. Their whispers pricked at Rosalind's ears, but she held her head high. They found Nathaniel in a modest office above the mercantile. His hair had thinned, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose, but when he saw Rosalind, his face broke into a boyish grin. "Rosie Hart," he exclaimed, rushing forward. "Lord above, I heard you'd married Nolan Pratt, but then word came you'd vanished." His smile faltered. Are you well?" Rosalind glanced at Chayton, whose hand rested lightly on the small of her back. Her cheeks warmed. "Better than I've ever been," she said simply. Nathaniel studied her a moment longer, then gestured them inside. Papers cluttered his desk, shelves sagged with books. He cleared space and sat. "Tell me everything." So she did. The forced marriage, her father's death, Nolan's betrayal in the desert, Chayton finding her, saving her, marrying her, and then her father's words, and the truth about the contract. Nathaniel's eyes darkened. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Desertion in such a manner is more than cruelty. It's attempted murder. And under the statutes, a marriage broken by such an act voids the husband's claim. By law, you retain your inheritance. He tapped a book. And more, since you were wed, and he abandoned you without consummation or provision, you are entitled to half of his estate as penalty. Rosalind's breath caught. Half? Half, Nathaniel confirmed. The law can be cruel, Rosie, but sometimes it can be just as cruel to the guilty as they were to you. Chayton's mouth curved faintly. Not quite a smile, but the satisfaction of a warrior hearing a strategy worthy of respect. Then let us bring him before the law. The day of the hearing drew a crowd. Townsfolk packed the courthouse, eager for spectacle. Nolan Pratt stood at the front, smug in his tailored coat, pale hair combed slick. When he saw Rosalind enter, fuller in figure but radiant with health, hand resting in Chayton's, his smirk faltered. Well, well, he drawled, loud enough for whispers to catch. The desert didn't take you after all. No, Rosalind answered calmly, her voice carrying in the hush. It didn't. A stronger man than you found me. Gasps rippled. Nolan's eyes darted to Chayton, standing tall, arms crossed over his broad chest. Dark gaze like iron. For the first time, unease flickered in his expression. The judge called for order. The case was laid. Nathaniel spoke with precision, voice steady, every word like a nail driven into wood. My client, Rosalind Hart, was lawfully wed to Nolan Pratt under contract binding lands and property. Within days of the union, Mr. Pratt abandoned her in the desert, without provision, without intent of rescue. This act constitutes attempted murder. Such breach nullifies his claim to her inheritance. Furthermore, under marital statute, she is owed half of his holdings as recompense. The courtroom buzzed. Nolan blustered, shouting, Lies! She's fabricating! Look at her! Who would want her? She wandered off in grief. Enough, the judge snapped. Nathaniel adjusted his spectacles. We have witness testimony. He gestured to Rosalind. Her heart pounded as she rose. The room's eyes pressed heavy upon her. For a moment, the old shame threatened to choke her, but then she felt Chayton's gaze on her back, solid and steady, reminding her who she had become. She told her story, every word clear, every detail steady, the sunburn, the thirst, Nolan's words. Better the desert than a lifetime shackled to a woman I can't desire. The room went still. Nolan's face flushed red. She lies. Nathaniel cut him off. Do you deny riding her into the desert with only 2 empty canteens left at her side? Nolan faltered. Sweat beaded at his brow. The judge's gavel cracked down. Enough. The evidence is plain. Mr. Pratt, by abandonment and intent of harm, you forfeited your claim. Rosalind Hart retains full inheritance of the Hart estate and is granted half of your current property as damages. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, exclamations. Nolan swore, pounding his fist, but the gavel silenced him. Rosalind's knees trembled, but she held herself tall. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, Do not let anyone take from you what is rightfully yours. At last, she had not. Afterward, townsfolk watched wide-eyed as Rosalind and Chayton stepped from the courthouse hand in hand. She had come not as a discarded bride, not as a woman mocked for her body, but as a wife cherished by the strongest warrior, and as the rightful heir to both her father's land and half her betrayer's fortune. Nathaniel clasped her hands, beaming. I told you once I'd fight for you. I'm glad I could keep my promise. You did more than fight, Rosalind said, voice thick with gratitude. You gave me back my father's gift. Chayton clasped Nathaniel's forearm in the manner of warriors. Your tongue is as sharp as a blade, he said simply. I honor it. Nathaniel laughed, a bit breathless at the sheer strength of the warrior's grip. And I honor you, sir. As they parted, Nathaniel's eyes lingered on Rosalind. You deserve every bit of this, Rosie. Don't ever forget it. She smiled. I won't. That evening, Rosalind stood at the threshold of the Pratt house. Her house now. The grand 2-story loomed against the sunset, windows gleaming gold. The door creaked as she opened it, the air inside still heavy with Nolan's arrogance. Chayton followed her in, his presence filling the space with something far stronger than wealth. Certainty. She turned to him, voice trembling with memory. This was where I was supposed to be touched for the first time, where I was supposed to be made a wife. But he left me empty. Chayton stepped closer, his dark eyes fierce. Then let us take back what he tried to steal. Not his wealth, not his land, but the truth of you. Her breath caught. He swept her into his arms, carried her up the wide staircase, and into the bedroom that had once been Nolan's pride. The bed stood there, cold and untouched. Chayton laid her upon it gently, his lips pressed to hers, slow, reverent, claiming not what was denied, but what was always hers to give freely. And as they joined there, laughter and cruelty faded. Nolan's shadow was gone. Only the strength of a warrior and the heart of a woman once abandoned remained, bound together at last in the bed where betrayal had ended, and a love had triumphed. The Pratt Ranch stood like a monument to arrogance. Whitewashed boards, high gables, a barn bigger than most men's homes. For years it had been Nolan's pride, the backdrop to his boasting. But when Rosalind and Chayton arrived with the court's decree in hand, the house seemed smaller, diminished, stripped of the cruelty that had once filled it. The keys were hers, the land was hers, and by law half of all Nolan's holdings, the herds, the wagons, the accounts, belonged to her as well. Rosalind stood at the front door, heart beating fast. She had not walked here since the day Nolan led her into the desert to die. That memory prickled her skin. For a moment, the weight of it threatened to break her knees. But then she felt Chayton at her side, broad chest close, his arm brushing hers. He did not have to speak. His presence alone was enough to remind her. She was not entering as a cast-off. She was entering as a woman returned whole. She unlocked the door. The air smelled of old varnish and dust. Furniture still lined the rooms. Rich wood, stiff chairs, rugs patterned with designs meant to impress. The emptiness in the house echoed. Nolan had lost it all. Rosalind walked slowly from room to room, each step reclaiming what had been stolen. She trailed her fingers over the banister. She touched the dining table where Nolan had once laughed with his friends while she sat silent at the edge. She paused at the parlor where she had waited, dressed as a bride for a husband who never came to her. Her breath hitched. The ache of those hours flooded back, threatening to swallow her. But Chayton's hand slid into hers, grounding her. His calloused palm, strong and warm, folded around her smaller fingers. "No ghosts here," he said, voice low but sure. "Only walls, and we are stronger than walls." Rosalind exhaled. She believed him. When they reached the master bedroom, she froze at the threshold. The bed stood tall, draped in sheets that had never known her touch. It had been meant for her wedding night, the place where her innocence was supposed to be claimed, her heart made secure. Instead, it had stood cold, a symbol of rejection and humiliation. Tears stung her eyes. She whispered, "This was supposed to be where I became a wife." Chayton stepped behind her, his chest pressed to her back. His arm circled her waist, strong and sure. His breath warmed her ear as he murmured, "Then let us make it so, not as he intended, but as we choose." Rosalind trembled. "Here? In his house?" "Yes." His tone was steady, resolute. "Here, so that it no longer belongs to him, so that every stone, every board remembers us, not him." She turned, tears slipping down her cheeks. He cupped her face, thumb brushing them away. His dark eyes burned with something fierce. "He left you as if you were unworthy. I will love you here so deeply the house itself will forget his name." Her breath shuddered. She nodded. They crossed the threshold together. Chayton lifted her, effortless, powerful, his arms like carved timber beneath her. He laid her gently upon the bed, not as one lays down a burden, but as one places something precious in a shrine. He kissed her slow, reverent, each touch a vow. His hands mapped her curves with pride, not shame. His body pressed to hers with the weight of a man who knew exactly who he was and who she was to him. And there, in the very place her ex-husband had denied her, Rosalind gave herself freely at last. The bed creaked under their joining, But it did not groan in protest. It accepted. It sanctified. It became theirs. For hours, the house that had once been silent rang with the sounds of real love. Whispered names, gasps of joy, murmured promises. Shadows danced across the walls. And when at last they lay spent in each other's arms, the air felt cleansed, heavy not with sorrow, but with fulfillment. By morning, news had spread. The townsfolk who had watched the trial shook their heads in awe at Rosalind's triumph. Whispers turned to respect. The woman abandoned had become the woman victorious. Back at the Comanche camp, her return was greeted with something deeper. The grandmothers brought gifts of woven baskets and dried herbs. Children swarmed her, eager for stories of the big white house. Even the chief, once her harshest critic, came to her fire, looked into her eyes and said, "You are no longer outsider. You are his. You are ours." Rosalind bowed her head, tears stinging, heart swelling. For the first time, she belonged not because of duty, nor because of pity, but because she had proven herself through strength and love. And when she sat beside Chayton that night, her hand in his, she realized something she had never thought possible. She was no longer simply Rosalind Hart, daughter of a dying man. She was Rosalind, wife of a warrior, mother-to-be of a new future, mistress of both land and love. She had been left in the desert to die. She had been mocked, unloved, cast aside, but she had risen. She had been carried not only by the arms of a man, but by the faith of her own heart that refused to stop beating. And in the end, she was not just saved, she was chosen. Chosen by a warrior, chosen by a tribe, chosen by justice, and most of all, chosen by love. Evening laid its gold across the land, the light long and gentle. The wind carried the scent of cut hay and wildflowers, and in the distance cattle lowed, their voices rolling like thunder, softened by miles. Rosalind stood at the edge of her porch, the porch of her father's house, the house Nolan had once schemed to steal. The boards beneath her feet were the same ones she had crossed as a girl, the same ones she had walked down on the day of her first marriage, trembling, unwanted. But now she stood taller. Her body was still full, heavy as before, but it no longer felt like a chain. It felt like her, sturdy, warm, resilient. She rested one hand against the post where her father had once leaned and told her stories. She could almost hear his voice. "Don't let anyone take what is yours, Rosie. Stand firm." Her eyes filled, but not with sorrow, with pride. Behind her came the steady tread of boots. Chayton stepped onto the porch, tall, broad, shoulders filling the doorway, before he came to stand beside her. The setting sun painted his bronze skin in firelight, carved his muscles into shadow and flame. His presence was a wall of certainty, unshaken by time or trial. He slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her against his side. She leaned into him, fitting as naturally as water into a hollow stone. Together they looked out over the fields that were hers again, fields Nolan had tried to claim, but had lost through his own cruelty. "Your land," Chayton said, his deep voice steady as the earth. "Our land," Rosalind corrected softly. He turned his head, pressed a kiss to her temple. "Yes, ours." That night, the tribe gathered for a feast in her honor. They roasted venison over open flames, baked bread in clay ovens, and sang songs beneath the stars. The grandmother sat beside Rosalind, placing shawls over her shoulders, tokens of acceptance. Children danced at her feet, laughing when she clapped along. When Chayton rose to speak, the camp grew quiet. His voice carried, rich and commanding. "This woman was left to die," he said, one hand resting on Rosalind's shoulder. "But she lived. She was mocked. She was scorned. Yet she stood. She stood by me, and I by her. She is no stranger here. She is my wife. She is of us." A cheer rose, some voices stronger than others, but all voices united. The final wall between Rosalind and the tribe crumbled. She was no longer the fat white widow whispered about at fires. She was Rosalind of the people. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She clasped Chayton's hand, squeezing hard. Later, when the fires burned low and the stars spilled silver across the plains, Rosalind and Chayton returned to her father's porch. The house stood solid behind them, the land stretched vast before them, and the falcon carving Chayton had given her hung at her chest. She turned to him, voice trembling with the weight of truth. I thought I was nothing more than what the world saw. Too large, too unwanted. I thought being abandoned meant I was worthless. Chayton's dark eyes fixed on hers. The world was blind, he said. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with reverence. I see you, all of you, and you are worth more than land, more than gold, more than breath itself. Her throat tightened. She whispered, I love you. And I love you, he said, the words simple but heavy as stone. He drew her close, kissed her slow beneath the stars. And when they pulled apart, Rosalind lifted her gaze skyward, to the endless wheel of constellations her father had once pointed out to her. For the first time since his passing, she felt him smiling. You are not alone, Rosie. His voice seemed to echo in the wind. I told you, you would not be. She leaned into Chayton, his strength a fortress, his love a fire. She had been left to die in the desert. She had been mocked, unloved, betrayed. But now she stood alive, cherished and free. And the land, the house, the tribe, and the man at her side bore witness to the truth her father had always believed. Rosalind Hart was not a discarded woman. She was a warrior's wife. She was a keeper of land and legacy. She was chosen. And the night carried her laughter across the fields like a hymn to the stars.